You are a prehistoric human standing at the mouth of a cave, gripping a brand new spear. Mammoths wait out there. Glory waits out there. Dinner is definitely out there. And our hero looks at all of it and decides, I'll begin after I reorganize these rocks by color. 20,000 years later, you open a blank document for the business, the book, the course, the workout plan, the application, or the suspiciously ambitious sourdough era that's supposed to change your life. Then you rename the file, pick a font, and watch one video about productivity. 40 minutes vanish, and somehow you now know how an octopus dreams, yet the document still holds nothing but a blinking cursor and the faint smell of shame. Humans crossed deserts, oceans, and ice sheets, and dealt with whatever prehistoric swamp first produced mosquitoes, so starting a podcast shouldn't feel like approaching a cave that several previous podcasters never walked out of. But it does, and that gap between our track record and our hesitation is worth taking apart. Laziness is the easy answer. Perfectionism is the more flattering one. Both can be true at once, and neither explains the physical weight of hesitation, the tightening in the chest, the sudden fatigue, the urge to grab any task with a known ending instead. Neither explains why you can grind through familiar work without complaint and then collapse like a Victorian fainting patient the moment something new shows up. Here's the short version. Starting asks your brain to trade known returns for information it doesn't have yet, while putting your time, energy, status, and opportunities inside a result it can't price. Hesitation is the pause while that internal system asks one reasonable question, which is whether this exploration is worth funding. Stick around because the fuller answer runs through casino mathematics, children reacting to unpredictable homes, honeybees running an unofficial scouting department, and a mismatch so absurd that a decision system built for the Stone Age is now getting outmaneuvered by a red notification badge. Hesitation deserves better than getting written off as cowardice. Ancestors who said yes to every novel opportunity didn't last long, and the hominin who licked every new mushroom in the spirit of personal growth never became a respected elder. Yet a group that refused to test a new water source, food patch, tool, route, or ally could get wiped out the moment the familiar option failed them. That tension sits at the center of one of the oldest problems in behavior, known as the explorer-exploit dilemma. Exploit sounds sinister, but here it just means using what already works. Return to the berry patch. Hunt the route where tracks appeared yesterday. Build the tool you already understand. Exploration means paying a cost now to find out whether something unfamiliar might pay off later. Picture two valleys. One reliably hands you 6 handfuls of food, while the other might give you nothing, or it might hand you enough food to make you the Jeff Bezos of dried figs. Weeks before winter, information about that second valley has real value. Night falling, a hungry kid, and something behind you coughing in a distinctly feline way, and the boring valley suddenly looks like a premium lifestyle brand. None of this means the human brain simply hates new things. It hesitates because it's trying to decide whether the new thing is safe, learnable, and worth trading known returns for, and starting a project usually hands it almost none of that information. That detail matters more than it sounds. A new project isn't just a task, it's a cloud of unanswered questions to the part of your brain running the decision. How much energy will this cost? How long will it take? Will you be any good at it? What else gets lost by choosing it? Will people laugh? Can the damage be undone if it fails? And if it succeeds, do you become the sort of person who says, circle back, without irony? Your brain doesn't need to believe death is likely here, only that the outcome distribution has gone foggy. Known options carry evidence with them. You've survived your current routine before. You know exactly what scrolling does. You know what another planning session feels like. The new thing might promise more, but the old thing hands over receipts. Researchers have made this ancient trade-off visible through a deceptively simple game where participants choose between options paying different, partly hidden amounts. In a 2014 study led by Robert Wilson, people leaned toward exploring an uncertain option far more when they expected several future choices ahead of them rather than just one. That tracks. With a long horizon, information gathered now improves every decision after it. With one move left, exploring becomes all tuition and no degree. Participants also seem to run more than one exploration strategy at once. Sometimes they deliberately picked the less-known option because the information itself had value, and sometimes greater uncertainty simply made their choices noisier, producing exploration that looked closer to random. Your brain, in other words, can send a careful scout into the fog, or it can briefly turn into a raccoon in a supermarket, and either one can turn up something useful. A 2026 study led by Clément found something stranger still. Across 3 datasets totaling 85 participants, people sampled options that produced colors instead of immediate money. When the payoff decision came later, they didn't start by bouncing efficiently between the most uncertain options. Instead, they often sampled one novel option several times in a row before switching to another. Researchers named this pattern local uncertainty reduction. Rather than mapping the whole territory at once, people first made one small piece of it legible and only afterward turned their attention toward whichever option remained most uncertain. That early repetition wasn't statistically the best way to gather all the available information, and yet the people who used it turned out to be better at grasping the task's overall structure. The researchers suspect that sampling one option repeatedly cuts the mental cost of switching back and forth between competing hypotheses. Repetition, then, isn't automatically the enemy of exploration. Sometimes it's how a brain with real limits explores without holding 17 foggy possibilities open at once. Your project may be demanding a global map from you while your brain is asking for one local patch it can actually understand. Brain imaging work from Nathaniel Daw and colleagues found that exploratory choices preferentially engaged regions, including the frontopolar cortex. That doesn't mean there's one glowing try pottery button sitting behind your forehead, since brain regions handle multiple jobs at once. But it does confirm that choosing the unfamiliar is active computation rather than the absence of thought. Exploration is work, full stop. Nature rarely foots that bill all the time either. Honeybee colonies split into scouts who search for new food sources and recruits who return to locations the scouts already found. The right mix shifts with conditions, persistence, and what the colony already knows, because a colony made entirely of recruits could miss a whole field of flowers, while a colony made entirely of scouts would turn into an airborne strategy meeting where nobody brings home lunch. One tiny, wonderfully detailed study tracked every outdoor flight from 4 bumblebees across their entire foraging lives, 31 days and 244 flights in total. Early flights explored the landscape broadly and learned routes later turned straighter and more efficient, yet the 4 bees differed dramatically from each other. One committed to a patch fast, another kept exploring widely long after. Even among 4 fuzzy insects with 0 motivational podcasts, no single personality won out as correct. That's the real point of the animal comparison. Healthy systems don't lock permanently into novelty or into familiarity, they regulate the ratio between the two. Exploration buys information, exploitation pays today's bills, and the hesitation before something new is your nervous system asking which economy it's currently living inside. Your reserves shift the answer considerably. Models of foraging under starvation risk predict that sampling an uncertain food source becomes less attractive once reserves run low or time runs short, because the forager has to survive the bad samples long enough to actually benefit from what it learns. Translated into human terms, curiosity gets cheaper when failure is survivable. None of this means your brain runs a literal mammoth meat gauge before you open Excel. It means one general rule holds across uncertain environments. Feeling secure, rested, supported, and able to absorb mistakes makes the unknown look interesting, while tight money, bad sleep, high stress, or 3 people already needing something from you can turn that same unknown into an invoice written by a demon. A 2025 experiment offers an unusually physical version of this. Researchers used breathing resistance to create an aversive bodily state while people completed an exploratory state task, and among 58 participants without a mental health diagnosis, directed exploration dropped during the breathing manipulation. That effect didn't show up the same way among 61 participants with affective disorders and elevated anxiety symptoms, so this isn't a universal rule, and human nervous systems keep up their long campaign against fitting neatly inside motivational posters. Still, it shows that changing the body's sense of strain can change whether seeking uncertain information feels worth the effort. A developmental clue turns up here too, though it needs handling with care. Across 2 studies of children aged 10 to 13, researchers found that reported childhood unpredictability tracked with less exploration and more repetition of previous choices. The study stayed modest in size, and an association proves neither destiny nor a single cause, but the pattern is suggestive. An environment that teaches you surprise usually means disruption rather than opportunity can turn sticking with known options into a learned form of intelligence. Humans also rewrote the exploration equation by sharing risk. Hunter-gatherer life was never one rugged individual striding into the wilderness while a cinematic drum plays. Food acquisition varied, knowledge stayed social, and care ran cooperative. Anthropological work shows foraging choices get shaped not just by average returns, but by the risks surrounding those returns and by obligations to provision other people, while sharing, mobility, and support buffer a bad day. So, as an evolutionary inference rather than a fossilized psychological fact, it makes sense that starting feels different when someone has your back. The unknown costs less when information, food, labor, and failure aren't carried alone, and a person saying, "Try it, I'll help," changes more than your mood. It changes the entire risk calculation. Now bring status into it. For a deeply social primate, a failed attempt isn't just lost effort. It can reveal information about competence. Nobody can excavate an ancient brain and prove your fear of publishing a video was designed by Pleistocene reputation management. To be fair, but in small interdependent groups, how others judged your reliability, skill, and value could affect your access to cooperation, allies, and mates. Sensitivity to evaluation isn't some bizarre bolt-on to human psychology. It's part of being an animal whose survival strategy includes other animals remembering what you did. That sets up one of modern life's darker little jokes. Before you begin, the imagined version of the project stays perfect. The book in your head reads brilliantly. The business could be enormous. Your future body has shoulders that require planning permission. The moment you act, reality gets a vote, and the first paragraph turns out clumsy. The first customer says no. The first workout reveals that stairs have quietly been defeating you for years. Inaction preserves possible status. Action produces evidence. Behavioral economists William Samuelson and Richard Zeckhauser named this pattern status quo bias, where framing an option as the current state makes people choose it disproportionately. The effect isn't irrational across the board since switching carries real costs and familiarity carries real information. But the pull of the default can persist even when the default was arbitrary to begin with. And as the number of alternatives climbs, the relative shelter of do what I'm already doing gets more attractive, not less. That's why 12 possible new directions often produce no direction at all. The internet tells you that you could learn coding, start a channel, sell a product, change careers, move countries, build passive income, master cold plunges, and apparently wake at 4:17 a.m. to negotiate with your mitochondria. Each option drags an opportunity cost behind it, and choosing one means temporarily killing 11 possible selves, so the brain settles on the one identity compatible with all of them, a person who is still researching. Hesitation then gets reinforced by relief. Contemporary procrastination research increasingly treats delay not as failed time management but as short-term mood regulation, since an aversive task creates uncertainty, boredom, frustration, self-doubt, or anxiety, and avoiding it improves your mood right now. That immediate relief teaches the brain something specific. When this task shows up, escape works. A 2025 meta-analysis combined 88 studies covering more than 63,000 people across 17 countries and found a moderate association between procrastination and depression, anxiety, and stress. The smaller body of longitudinal evidence suggested the relationship might run in both directions. Translation: distress encourages delay, delay creates more distress, and everyone involved keeps forwarding the same invoice to tomorrow. The reward for avoidance arrives fast, and that's what makes the lesson so powerful. Starting the application might improve your life in 6 months, or it might not, but closing the application and opening a familiar app improves your emotional weather in 6 seconds flat. One option offers delayed, ambiguous value. The other hands you an instant reduction in discomfort, followed by a parade of novelty that demands nothing durable from you in return. Notice the cruelty baked into that design. Your phone stays novel enough to trigger exploration but familiar enough to feel safe, and every swipe delivers uncertain information inside a perfectly rehearsed movement, a slot machine you already know how to use. Your project runs the opposite way. The subject matters deeply, but the next action stays unclear. The low-value option ships with perfect onboarding. The high-value option opens on a blank page. This is the modern bridge you're actually standing on. You're not choosing between start my meaningful thing and empty space. You're choosing between a high uncertainty action with delayed feedback and an entire ecosystem of known actions engineered for immediate feedback. The ancestral brain has walked into a casino where the carpet has Wi-Fi, which brings us to the evolutionary mismatch itself. A mismatch like this happens when a trait or decision rule built for one kind of environment ends up operating inside a radically different one. Caution around costly uncertainty isn't a bug, and selective exploration makes plenty of sense on its own terms. But most ancestral novelty stayed concrete, local, embodied, and quick to inform you. Walk toward the ridge and the ridge gets closer. Strike the stone and you see whether it flakes. Ask someone to join the hunt, and a human face answers back. The environment imposed boundaries, and early attempts usually return usable information. Modern beginnings, by contrast, can be abstract, solitary, and almost offensively unbounded. Build a personal brand, get healthy, change careers, write a book. These aren't actions, they're weather systems, with no visible path, no natural stopping point, no guaranteed feedback, and no clear tribe standing beside you, even as the imagined audience swells to include every person on Earth, tomatoes and high-speed internet in hand. Meanwhile, exploiting the familiar has become nearly frictionless. Ancestors could revisit a known berry patch, but eventually the berries ran out. The stream never generated infinite water shaped like videos, and gossip ended once the other 6 people fell asleep. Today, 1,000 systems compete to make sure the familiar option never runs dry, because your continued exploitation happens to be someone else's quarterly revenue. Picture the mismatch in full. A cautious forager stands before a foggy trail labeled "Become a Beginner in Public," while behind him sit glowing vending machines dispensing tiny pellets of certainty. One more clip, one more email refresh, one more productivity system, one more person explaining how to start. His hesitation system asks whether there's enough information yet, and the vending machines answer back immediately, "Absolutely not. Here's more content about that." The system built to prevent reckless exploration has run straight into an environment where postponement stays safe, stimulating, socially acceptable, and available forever. That's why waiting can drag on long after it stops serving you, since no predator forces the decision and no season closes the menu. There is always Monday. Nuance matters here, because not every hesitation is an obsolete alarm going off for no reason. Sometimes the project really is wrong. Sometimes you're genuinely exhausted. Sometimes the cost really is too high. And anxiety, depression, ADHD, chronic stress, disability, and material insecurity can all change initiation in ways no caveman story can reduce to a punchline. People also differ in their appetite for uncertainty, since evolution never issued one universal brain preset with a settings menu attached. Hesitation can carry real information. The useful question isn't, "How do I defeat this weakness?" It's, "What uncertainty is my system reacting to? And is that price real, exaggerated, or simply undefined?" That distinction is what separates discernment from automatic avoidance. When the price is undefined, motivation speeches are usually the wrong tool for the job. Because the decision system doesn't need more shouting, it needs a cheaper experiment. Call this the scout test. Before demanding motivation from yourself, make the next move answer 4 questions. What will I learn? What's the most I can lose? When does the experiment stop? And who, if anyone, can help me run it? Say you want to start a channel. Become a YouTuber is an identity gamble with no endpoint, while record 60 seconds on my phone and don't publish it is an information purchase. It tells you how your voice sounds, whether the format interests you, and which part feels hardest, and just like that, you've converted a leap into a sample. Wanting to write doesn't mean commanding yourself to produce a book. Open a deliberately ugly document called version 0, write 1 bad paragraph, and stop at 10 minutes. The badness isn't a failure of quality control. It's camouflage, telling the status system that no public verdict is happening today. Wanting to exercise runs into the same trap, since Transform My Body summons a multi-year fog bank instantly. Put on shoes and walk to the end of the street instead. Wanting to change careers doesn't require resigning in a blaze of inspirational music either. Ask one person what an ordinary Tuesday in that job actually feels like. Each of these moves reduces uncertainty while keeping the cost reversible. This works with the ancient logic instead of fighting it. Exploration grows more valuable when it returns information, safer when the first law stays bounded, easier when the horizon stays visible. A 10-minute attempt says there's an endpoint. A rough draft says status isn't on trial yet. A conversation says knowledge can be social. A friend working beside you says you're not crossing the ridge alone. The newest research adds one more rule on top of all this. Investigate one local patch first. Don't ask your brain to compare 12 possible careers, platforms, routines, or identities all at once. Choose one bounded option and sample it long enough to actually learn something, because you don't need a satellite map of the entire forest before you inspect one tree. The goal was never to make the whole project feel safe, and it may never get there. The real goal is making the next probe cheaper than staying uncertain. Be careful too with the fantasy that confident people feel no hesitation at all. What looks like courage is often just infrastructure. Savings make experiments survivable. Experience makes costs legible. Mentors lend maps, teams distribute risk, and a person who starts easily may not carry some superior soul inside them. They likely just have more reserves, a shorter feedback loop, or 6 previous failures already proving that embarrassment isn't fatal. That's exactly why compassion is practical, not soft. Calling yourself lazy adds another threat on top of the task, since now beginning has to produce work and prove you're a good person at the same time. The blank page turns into a moral tribunal, and of course your nervous system postpones court. You are not broken because you hesitate at the edge of something new. The pause is an old quartermaster asking reasonable questions. Do we have supplies? Is there a path who is coming? Can we retreat? What will we learn if this goes badly? Don't fire the quartermaster, give them better answers instead. Make the first move small enough to survive. Make it concrete enough to see. Make it private enough that identity isn't on trial, and social enough that the uncertainty gets shared. Then, let action produce the information that thought never could. Back at the cave entrance, our prehistoric hero doesn't need a prophecy guaranteeing mammoth victory. He needs to test the spear, walk to the ridge, see fresh tracks, and know 2 friends stand behind him. Back at your desk, you don't need enough confidence to finish. You need one first action, small enough that your brain stops mistaking it for the entire journey. The blinking cursor was never a predator. It was fog, and across deep time, that fog has never once disappeared just because someone stood at the fire and researched walking. Notice which one stops you more, the fear that you'll fail, or the fear that you'll choose the wrong thing to begin. If you want to keep understanding why your brain and body do things that make no sense in the modern world, subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming.